For the third year and counting, Richard Skipper has been celebrating the artists you love. Richard Skipper is all about celebrating life, art, and his guest body of work. Please join us while he showcases these diverse and talented individuals. Here's Richard Skipper.
Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. Who or what are you celebrating today? There's so much to celebrate. We are on the beginning of a new week. We have a clean canvas. We can create and be whatever it is that we desire to create. I was just reading a wonderful article about becoming, and every single day we are becoming. It's a new slate. We're celebrating. And so many worlds are coming together today in terms of celebrating. Today, we are celebrating National Book Blitz Month, as we are doing all month. And we're going to be celebrating two incredible authors today who celebrate the world of dance. They live, eat, breathe, dance their entire lives. And I cannot wait to sit down and celebrate with both of them today. I'm also celebrating the new Richard Skipper Celebrates mug for 2023. Here it is, everyone. And you can get this on our Patreon page. Thank you, Aaron Califf, who has created that and has worked so tirelessly to make this show and so many of our shows possible. So a big shout out to her for all the work that she does. Today is also, and all this week is, believe it or not, National Mocktail Week. Since I don't drink, that's very exciting to me. And here's our recipe of the day. It's spicy watermelon mint aqua fresca. Doesn't that sound exciting? And if you want the recipe, just reach out to me and I will forward this to you. But first and foremost, we are celebrating these incredible women. And as I said, we are celebrating National Book Blitz Month all month. Let's take a look back at some of the great authors that I've had on this show since I began doing this at the beginning of COVID. Here they are. Liza, you're here and you're muted. There you are. I am so excited that you were here. Do you know how long I've wanted you on this show?
I do not.
Well, you're here today. I am so excited because you have written this incredible book called Making Broadway Dance, and you certainly have. I have had the good fortune of sitting in the theater and seeing your work first and foremost on so many occasions, not only on Broadway. I've seen a lot of your work at the Goodspeed Opera House. Shout out to them. One of my favorite theaters on the planet. And they give you the luxury, I know this, of having the time to create there. You are a dancer, a choreographer, a teacher, a historian. Out of all the hats that you wear, which one do you feel that you wear the most comfortably?
I think I'm most comfortable being a writer, a dance writer. I really love that work. I love the process. I love the research. It's a solitary thing, which I kind of like. Choreography is tough. You know, you have to get up in front of a room full of, 5, 10, 15, 20 people and tell them what to do. So it's stressful. So I'm very, very comfortable writing. I love the process. I love the discovery. That's been a great fit for me.
Now, one of my favorite quotes, and maybe you can clear this up today, but one of my favorite quotes, and I saw this quote again when I was researching your book, is, and please correct me if I get it wrong, but when you can no longer tell the story through just the spoken word, you sing, and when you can no longer just sing it, you dance it.
Yes.
I've heard that attributed to Gene Kelly, Bob Fosse. I even saw somewhere that Alan J. Lerner said it. Do you know where that comes from?
I do not. And there's so much mythology about the musical theater and musical theater dance. It's one of the reasons that I wrote the book, because you hear these things and they're attributed to all sorts of people. So I was trying to, narrow that in and do some retrieval of people who had been erased from the historical record. But that particular quote, I don't know who to attribute that to.
Now, I'm going to drop a name, and it's a dancer that I think you may know, and that's Chita Rivera. Years ago, I was having a conversation with Chita, and she says this with all due respect to all Broadway choreographers out there. So let me put that disclaimer out there first. But she said that when she started in the business, there was the Bob Fosse choreographer. There were teachers that taught that style. Michael Bennett, George Balanchine, who we're going to talk about a little later, and Jerome Robbins. She said in most Broadway musicals, and we're going back a few years ago when she said this, you could literally change the costumes on some shows and not be able to distinguish one style from another. What are your thoughts on that comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's truth. I talk about this in the book. There are some choreographers who really worked with a modernist system in terms of inventing movement and the development of movement. Someone like Agnes DeMille, I think certainly Bob Fosse falls into that category, where you can see their dances a mile away and it's Fosse or it's DeMille. And then I think Jerome Robbins came along, and Robbins was a chameleon with dance, and he could do anything. And he always hired assistants, expert assistants who would work with him. So it's very hard to tell what his dances are. He was much more interested in the libretto, in how dance integrated into the libretto, and what dance was bringing to the storytelling in terms of time and place. So I think his concerns, not in his classical ballet choreography, which I think does have a unique style, but his musical theater choreography is very hard to identify if you don't really know that it's him. So I think there is truth to that.
When you're brought in to choreograph a well-known show such as The Most Happy Fellow, which I loved your production of that, by the way. Dear friend of mine was in that production. When you are brought in to do that, you obviously want to bring as much of your own style into it as possible. And then there are people that have fond memories of other productions and everything. How do you mesh the two worlds together?
Well, on The Most Happy Fella, nobody really knew that choreography.
It's
It's
true.
not a particularly heavy dance show anyway, but I felt very unburdened by having to recreate, although I was working with the original dance arrangements. We didn't have new dance arrangements. So that does make it very, it can limit you, particularly on a Robbins show or a Fosse show. Fosse is, I think, the hardest. If you're hired to do Sweet Charity, that's a heavy lift. How do you outdo what he did on that show? So for me, I mean, my father trained me really as a choreographer, my father, Peter Gennaro, and he was really trained. That's us.
Yes, I love this photograph.
I think I was 12. We were doing a benefit for the Lincoln Center Library for the Performing Arts. Yes, that's a very fond memory. But yeah, I think, it just depends on who you're working with and what the original material was and how much leeway you have with changing it in terms of dance arrangement. Sometimes on a Broadway revival, they will bring in a new dance arranger, and that's a gift because then you really can start from clean slate. But, I've done Gypsy a few times, and it's hard because
I saw your production of Gypsy, Paper Mill Playhouse. Yes.
Those dance arrangements are really maps for the choreography. So it's hard to really get away from what Robbins did. But my father was really trained in the Robbins school of choreography. So I sort of was too. I do a lot of research on the period, time, place. It's very hard for me to make up a dance unless I really know what the dance is about and what the purpose of the dance is. So
Do you remember the first time you saw your father dance on stage?
Probably I more remember the television, because when I was a kid in the 60s
Mhm.
and the 70s, he was doing, dozens and dozens of television variety shows. So that's really, I have stronger memories of that. I don't know that I ever until much later saw him actually on stage
Mhm.
live.
And do you have a particular piece of advice that he gave you that stays with you with all the work you do, whether it be in your writing, your dance, or your choreography?
His biggest piece of advice was always keep working. Work breeds work. I mean, he just always said, don't turn anything down. Just keep working and working. You'll keep meeting people, and that's how you build a career. And I think there's truth to that. I think that some people, maybe better than I did, are more strategic about it. But I think you take a chance when you're strategic because the work is spare, and there's a lot of competition. And I think, no matter what project you do, you're always going to learn. And that experience, and you just take with you on to the next projects.
Now, since we are celebrating a National Book Blitz Month, I want to bring up your book for a moment. This photograph, it dances off the page. I mean, you can't, this says it all. What was the impetus for you to sit down and write this book?
Mm. Well, I will say about the picture also, I was searching and searching for an image, and Oxford University Press, who published the book, really wanted a single image. And my book covers lots of different choreographers. And I was thinking, oh, I could do like a collage. And they said, no, the single image is better. So I searched and searched, and I came across this photo of my father with Gwen Verdon. And it just, like you said, it just said Broadway dance to me, pops off this stage. So that's why I did that. And then, in terms of why I wrote the book, I was doing my graduate studies and I realized that there was really no one book that addressed musical theater dance from the perspective of methodology, how musical theater dancers create choreography. And that was, of course, an interest of mine. And I think it's very different from how ballet choreographers create or concert dancers, create dance. Musical theater dancers are walking into a predefined, show,
Mhm.
libretto, in which you have to fit within, and you're working with a director who has established a style for the production. So you really have to fit into a group. It's an essentially collaborative art form. So that's really why I did it, so that educators and people who are interested in dance could go to one place and really get a good handle on what the role and job of the choreographer is.
Well, before I bring on our next guest, I was born with two left feet, unfortunately, but I am such a fan of dance, and I going to the ballet, going to see dancers, just something just goes through my entire body, and it's just something that I wish that I could be a part of. I've been very, very fortunate because I've been a part of Dancers Over 40 for many,
Mhm.
many years, and I have emceed and hosted many of their events. Um, with all due respect, has there ever been a moment in your career that was a challenge to you in terms of creating the right movement in a project? And if so, how did you get through it?
First of all the time. It's always hard. It's never easy. It would be hard for me to think of just one example. Um, I mean, what I always go to when I am struggling is the book and the characters, and then the research of, well, what would people have danced like at that period of time, and then you're looking at the actual vocabularies of the moment, but then you're taking liberties with them. So you can expand on them, you can fuse them with other dance forms. If you have that kind of a clear process, even if you're stuck, you can usually work your way through it. But it's time consuming and it's hard. And I don't like just dance for the sake of dance in a musical. I really like the dance to have meaning and contribute to the narrative. So that's something that you're always trying to search and find.
Absolutely. Well, I want stick around because I'm going to bring on our next guest, and she has a phenomenal book. It's on the New York Times bestsellers list, Mr. B, George Balanchine's 20th Century. And today, I didn't realize this as we put this show together. Today is George Balanchine's birthday. I also found this incredible quote as I was putting the show together, and I love this. What are you stingy with yourselves? Why are you holding back? What are you saying? That's not the right quote. Yes, it is. There are other times. There is only now, right now, George Balanchine. I love that. And I'm going to bring on our guest, Jennifer Homans. Thank you so much for being here. And let me get this out of the way so we can see you. Hello, and meet Liza.
Hi, Liza, and thank you, Richard. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so thrilled that you're here. I know that you started dance or training as a ballerina when you were 8 years old. What was it that pulled you into this world? Liza literally was born into this world. Where did it begin for you?
Yeah, no, unlike Liza, I was not born into it. My parents were involved in the academy and worked at the University of Chicago, so it was a much more sort of it wasn't a theater world. It was a world of ideas, and I think I was brought into it because I started taking dance lessons and even sort of free dance with a Polish emigre dancer, and just moving to music and I grew up in a world of words, and this was a world of no words. And it was such a relief to me. It was just kind of liberating. And I was quite shy. So it was liberating for that reason, too, because I could have some sense of my own self and expressivity. I'm not sure I thought of it that way then, but without language. And that was very wonderful.
Well, I found this great quote that I'm going to pull up, and this is very interesting. Opera is all about saying goodbye. Virgil Thompson is reputed to have said, and ballet is all about saying hello. Can you expound upon that?
Yeah, I've also read that quote, and I think maybe what he has in mind is, and this is a guess, of course, is that there's something joyful about dance, and ballet certainly has that too. And so the natural thing about dance, we dance when we're happy usually. But of course, the theater arts and both across the theater arts have developed movement as also a form of expression of different kinds of sadness and tragedy. So I sort of I like the quote, but I don't think it's complete.
Okay. Now, this is your second book, am I correct?
It is.
Now, your first book was about the history of ballet.
That's right. I wrote a book called Apollo's Angels, A History of Ballet, which was sort of like this book, 10 years in the making. And it's a political and cultural history of ballet from its origins in the Italian and French courts, straight through the French and the Europeans and the Russians and back into Europe and into America. So it sort of tries to tell the story of this art form from its origins to the present.
So you grew up in Chicago. When you had this desire, what was it that pulled you in? Had you gone to the ballet? Was it a particular teacher in school, a mentor? What was it initially that got you through the door and to the bar the first time?
Yeah, I think I did see dance. My mother was quite adventurous, and she was very interested in all forms of theater. And I mean, I grew up during the Cold War, so dance was a big thing, and the Russians were in the United States from the 50s on, and so I would see these performances, and there was a lot of emotion in them and a lot of passion, and so that really drew me in. And I also loved the the technique. I was very sort of reassured, and I don't know if you felt this way, Liza, that you could actually work hard and see results. It was, if you worked hard and you did it well, you could see your body getting stronger. You could see it changing. You could see it moving. You could see it morphing into some, you were becoming another creature. This was all really interesting to me. And so it was sort of a combination of seeing and doing. And then, of course, music. It was just glorious to be able to move to music. And I loved all kinds of dance. I was trained in ballet, but I also took classes in, what we then called jazz and modern dance, contemporary dance, Graham, Cunningham. I was just so hungry for it all.
Now, as you got on your path and you're going to pursue a career as a dancer, did you have a particular goal in mind? And the old expression is life happens as you set goals or plans. I'm screwing that quote up. But as you were setting out on your life plan, you also became a writer yourself and a teacher. When did those changes in your life begin to take place?
I mean, I danced professionally and I loved it. And I was, I had enough of a career that I certainly could have kept going. But when I was about 26, 27, I stopped and I decided to go to school. And I think that's because there had always been something in me. I was that kid in the dance studio who had a book in their hands. And I was the one who was always registering the fellow dancers to vote and getting, and then, escaping rehearsal to read. And so there was some part of me that wanted to understand what this art form was that I was so passionate about and involved in. I mean, it's a little bit crazy when you think about it. Well, what is this thing? We turn out our feet. We try to learn how to coordinate our body to particular rhythms and music. It's quite extreme and it's quite artificial. It's not a natural form. So I wanted to understand, where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this was my sort of the academic side of my background coming in and the writerly side. And I always loved to write. So I decided I didn't know I was going to write about dance. Like you said, it just sort of things happen. But I did know that I wanted an education. So I went to college and at 26. And then I decided to go to graduate school and I studied history. And I thought I would leave dance completely behind because that was something you do. That was that world of not words. And now I was entering the world of words, right? But I couldn't get it out of my bloodstream, as it were. I just kept going back to it. And finally I thought, okay, I've got to bring these two worlds together and try to write about dance, which, as Liza was saying, is not easy, right? It's a very tough translation act.
So your first book is a history, and your second book, you focused on the life of one man, George Balanchine. Why did you choose this particular subject out of the millions that you could have chosen? Again, happy birthday to him today. I love, I've pulled a couple of photographs.
Yes, there's one.
I love this photo.
Balanchine and his girls,
Yes.
or his women, and that's Balanchine with with Melissa Hayden. I can't see who the dancer in the back is. Probably in Stars and Stripes.
Yeah. But why this?
Why Balanchine? I mean, so Balanchine was one of the great choreographers of the 20th century. And it was my experience. I had performed his works and thought they were extraordinary. I had seen his works over, from the mid 70s on. I had been at his funeral. I had just been so interested in what he had done for dance. And so I thought, and there wasn't there were several biographies, but not biographies that had been written long enough after his life. He died in 1983 to have some kind of, the perspective of time. And also there hadn't been biographies that were archival and really fully researched in a way that would, I thought, throw both historical and, then the challenge was the personal and the internal life, the inner life of the artist, and how do you describe that? So I entered this project, and it really, it absorbed my life for 10 years. I was absolutely obsessed with it, and he was a great subject, and never let me down as far as being endlessly fascinating and taking me down so many different roads that I had never expected.
I absolutely love that. Was there ever any time where you did feel, "Ugh, I can't go on with this anymore"? I mean, 10 years is a long time.
Yeah, there were times when I thought this is such a deep and complex subject that I'm not sure I can do it justice. And so I would become discouraged and, sort of, am I up to this as a writer, especially because I wanted to try to, I spent a lot of time on the thinking about the writing of it and how to make it it's an epic story, and it's a great story. So, it's a 20th century story. It's a story of he was born in St. Petersburg. He lived through the revolution, the Russian Revolution. As a child, he was starving. It was a very, very difficult time. He was ill. He got TB. He ended up leaving by then USSR when Lenin came to power, and he ended up in Weimar Germany in the 20s, and then in Paris in the 20s. And it's like a life that touched all of the major European and American touch points and Russian, of course, touch points of the 20th century. And then in the 30s, he ends up in New York. He emigrates to New York, and so he's part of this massive wave of exile and immigration that comes out of the First World War, the Revolution, then the Second World War. And so there's a vast changing of American culture based in part on these people who left other places and came here. And when he built the New York City Ballet in 1948, it came on after, years of effort and failure. And he just was, like Liza was saying, it was like, just keep making dances.
Mm-hmm.
That was he just kept making dances. And the New York City Ballet was not inevitable at all. It was probably the most unlikely outcome. And, this is something that it's hard for us to see now because we have lived with it for so long and it's lasted, but no one thought it could work, and it almost failed many times. So
here's a great quote from one of our viewers who's watching. Balanchine's reply to Richard Rogers regarding the letter's anxiety about collaborating on Your Toes. Balanchine said, "Don't worry, you write, I choreograph."
Exactly.
Well, both of you do both. So I want to ask each of you, and I'll start with you, Liza. What did you learn about yourself from writing this book?
I learned that I love to dig into individual passages of dance and really describe them and unpack them in terms of influence, dynamics, character development, placement within libretto. I love doing that.
And Jennifer?
I think for me, it was almost a spiritual journey in a way. I had understood when I was dancing. I remember my father once said to me, "You talk about it like it's a religion." And, then when I went to do the biography, I understood that it was that way. I wasn't making that up. And so learning how that came to be and the spiritual side of his work was a real, not that I became religious or anything, but it took me down a path into everything from Spinoza to Gurdjieff to Sufism to, Balanchine was a voracious and as Lincoln Kirstein put it, a sort of amateur theologian. And he was interested in mysticism. And these ideas and how the dance was somehow an aspect of the divine were really powerful to me. So that
Well,
affected me.
to me, it is a religion. I mean, when I see it, it's a religious experience for me. I'm going to ask both of you a question that I ask most writers that I interview. Uh, when do you know that it's right or the time to release it and give birth, if you will, to the public? Is it based on a deadline? Is it based on the publisher beating your door down? Is it based on you just knowing that it was ready? When did you know that this is it? It's ready. Jennifer?
I mean, it's a hard question. I think for me, I did, I did the way I work is I did vast amount of research first. I interviewed over 200 people. I was in archives across the United States, in Russia, in Georgia, where his family was from, the country, not the state, and in
Did
you
you
know
travel? Did you travel back and
Oh,
forth?
widely, and I often
Wow.
I went to places that he had been, I walked the streets where he had been. I figured it was very important for me to actually be in these places, and I understood that was right. Another biographer had said, "You must go," and so I did. I was in St. Petersburg, walking where he was as a child, even though, of course, St. Petersburg has changed a lot. It still made a big difference. But after I had done this vast amount of research and I finally had to say, okay, now it's time to write. There's always more to do. There's always more you don't know. And this is not an unusual experience, I think. So then it was just a question of putting it all together. And that started for me really the year before COVID. And then when COVID came, I just, thought, okay, you can't do any more research now. You can't. You can't. So that closed that door for me. And I just started writing, and I just kept writing until I was done.
Okay. And Liza, same question?
Yeah, similar answer. I also did an, enormous amount of research, interviews, spending hours at the Leeds Center Library. I did go to London and looked at the Jack Cole collection,
Wow.
which is in the Victoria Albert Museum. And I was writing for so long, and I'm with a group called the Musical Theater Forum, which includes a bunch of really terrific musical theater writers, Stacey Wolf and Liz Woolman and Ray Knapp. And we present work once a year to each other. And it was great for me. And they were very supportive. And at one point they just said to me, okay, you have to finish the book. You really have to finish the book right now. So I really, at that point, made a big push, got through it. And, to this day, I look at passages from the book and I'm editing and rewriting and thinking, damn, I wish I'd had a little more time. I mean, I don't
Totally.
think for
That
me,
was Gower Champion. Gower Champion was constantly going, I want to change that. I want to change that. He would drive people crazy, and he would do it. I mean, in today's world of the theater, that's a no-go. But he would go backstage and continue to give notes after his shows opened.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's part of my theater training. I was always wanting to keep changing things till they wouldn't let me anymore.
Yeah, I mean, Balanchine was the same. He changed things all the time, especially depending on the dancer. If there was a new dancer in the role, that was like having a new color on the canvas. You had to rework the rest of the canvas in order to, or rework that color into it. So it was, yeah, that's the nature of the art form, don't you think? That's a kind of
Absolutely.
constant change, alive, as you said, Richard. What's the matter with now? And now is always different from then.
Well, I want to ask you both, how has COVID affected your work in terms of the marketing, the promotion? I mean, having a book come out at this time, I mean, obviously, here we are doing a virtual presentation of talking about both of your books. And everyone, these books are available either on Amazon or your favorite bookseller. Call them and ask for them. I went over the weekend. They're on they're on their way through Barnes and Noble for me. So I can't wait for both of them to arrive. But when you were, obviously we've got and we're still going through this, and we don't know what tomorrow holds. How has this affected either of your lives in terms of how you are getting your book and your message out to people? You can decide who will go first.
Liza, please go ahead.
Well, my book was pretty much written. It was pretty much the writing. No, that's not true. I was still writing when COVID first hit. But then as it progressed, I'm also the Dean of Musical Theater, Manhattan School of Music. So when COVID hit, it completely upticked my job up there, and we had to completely redo the program and make it for Zoom and virtual productions. And I was just working nonstop throughout. So at the same time that I was doing that, the deadlines were coming for the book. And Oxford University Press uses some of their editors were in India. And just as the virus hit India at its absolute worst was when I was working with those people. So it was really, really rough going there for a while. Also, I hadn't gotten, stupidly, because I'm an inexperienced, on writing books, I hadn't gotten my photos in order. So I had to do that all online, which was also quite a treat. And my friends at the library were wonderful to me and kind of would sneaking me stuff and, helping me to get things, made copies of. But yeah, it was the timing of it was not great for me. But in terms of the marketing that I've done, it hasn't really affected anything because now so much is on Zoom and interviews, and that's been pretty good. I mean, for me.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the whole experience of having a book come out in this sort of we could call it a long COVID moment, I suppose, has been, I mean, COVID was so hard for everybody, and so hard for, harder for some than for others, for sure. But I think it gave me a feeling of, this whole idea of now was just to the fore. It was kind of, well, what about now? Well, what else we don't know. We really don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I felt sort of a lot of gratitude, actually, to be able to bring a book out now and to have whatever came from that. And so I did a little bit of traveling, but not a lot. And I did a lot of events on Zoom, like Liza. And I've just been I feel very open, and that I feel lucky to be doing this right now.
Another question that I have for both of you, doing the work that you both do, and I'll start with you, Liza, are you able to just go and sit back and enjoy the dance? Or is your mind always running it, well, I think I could have done it this way? Or, we all have this inner critic going in with our own work. Is it going always on overdrive with other people's work as well?
Yes.
I think that's true of every artist.
Yeah. I was also a Tony nominator and a Tony voter for a long time. And so you really could not let down because you're constantly assessing, because you're going to have to vote or nominate. But I always tell my students, once you do this, you're kind of ruined as an audience member because you know too much and it is hard. It's particularly with me with musical theater. With ballet or any kind of, concert dances, those I can kind of let up a little bit more and just enjoy myself, especially if it's works that I know, like certainly the Balanchine rep, if it's something that I know and I'm just going to see, I can kind of pretty much let go and just really enjoy the beauty of it.
Same question, Jennifer.
I mean, I've been a critic for years, as well as I've written for the New Republic. I'm now the dance critic for the New Yorker. So I have this same apparatus that Liza was talking about. And it's true that when I go to the theater, I'm certainly very aware of where what I'm seeing might fit in whatever larger picture I have in my mind of what's going on in the field. But I would say I also, I think it was Jerome Robbins who told Twyla Tharp one time when she was very nervous about a premiere. He said, "They want to like it." And I do feel that way when I sit in a theater, and I'm still a sucker for the
Yeah.
lights go down and the music begins, and I want to like it. And so I'm sort of right there. And the best performances, of course, are the ones that just sweep you in,
Mhm.
and your mind in a way turns off. So, it's like dancing in that way. Somebody once said to me, the minute your mind is going, you're kind of, it's going to be tough. It's really going to be tough. But you
Well,
have to kind of allow that flow to come. And that's also something that you have to kind of work on in a way. I don't know if you would agree with that, Liza, but I just, that's how I try to approach it.
mhm. Is there a particular performance that you've seen in the world of dance that really has stuck with you throughout, always, that above all others, and you go, wow, that was the pinnacle for me in terms of a particular performance?
Well, for me, certainly, the those early, not early, those mid Balanchine years or maybe you would even call them late in the 70s, when I was going to see the company every night pretty much. And Suzanne Farrell, I won't be the first person to say this, was a deep influence on me, and her performances were just so overwhelming. And so, you would leave the theater feeling that you had seen something, that you were a bigger person somehow for having been there, and that the world was bigger, and it was better too. Everything was brighter and deeper. So I would say those were the most influential performances, although I've certainly seen lots of others that were very galvanizing and affecting.
Liza?
I was so lucky because my parents, of course, were avid theater goers. My mother had been a ballerina, and and then went into musical theater as well. And so they both we went to see dance all the time, and during a really rich period of dance in the 70s.
Mhm.
And so we would see. I remember premiere of Dances at a Gathering, which was just very, really embedded in my brain. And Cry with Judith Jameson, just so
Oh, yes.
great. Anything Baryshnikov, and when he first got
Totally.
all those early Push Comes to Shove, they're all just but I think the most memorable, and maybe it was because I was so young, I must have been about 12, and I was doing a benefit with my father at the John Drew in East Hampton.
Mm.
And Carmen de Lavalade was on the program. And she did a piece, I think it was called Creation of the World, and she spoke and danced. And it was created for her by her husband, Joffrey Holder. And that made an enormous impression on me. And I always just wanted to dance like Carmen de Lavalade.
That's great. Liza, since we are celebrating National Book Blitz Month, are there any particular books written about dance that you highly recommend to our viewers?
Well, I have Jennifer's first book, and I'm looking right now across my counter at the new book, which I just got, and I'm very excited to read.
Thank you.
And there are so many wonderful books. And of course, I'm blanking out right now. Lynn Garofalo just wrote a massive book on Nijinsky, which looks really. I've started it. It will take me a while to get through it because I don't have that much time to read. But it's such an impeccable research and beautifully done. And then I like the collections. I just got one. Maybe when Jennifer talks, I could run over and pull the title. I love to hear, chapters from different writers. Those are just great books and really useful and very stimulating for me.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I guess I would say I agree with Liza, and I certainly would also recommend the Nijinsky book that Lynn Garofalo just wrote, which is a very interesting and detailed account of a woman choreographer that we often forget had a huge effect and created really remarkable work that we can still see today. Lenos in particular. And for me, I don't know. It all flies out of my head too. There are so many good books. I guess I would say, one book that I've loved is the memoirs of Karsavina, who was dancing with the Ballet Russe and with the Imperial Ballet, and wrote of her life in Russia in the early 20th century. And it's a very powerful and personal kind of account of what she experienced and went through, including the revolution. And then I guess the other thing I would, maybe this is not a cop-out, I hope, but I found as I was working that it was very important for me to read, especially because it was Balanchine, Russian literature. And, he would always say to his dancers when they were at loose ends or needed something extra, or I don't know, whenever he thought of it to say it to them, he would say, well, go read War and Peace.
Wow.
And so I read a lot of Russian literature, and, War and Peace has some wonderful dance moments in it. Natasha's dance. And so there are, I think it's great to read fiction as well, even though we're both more involved in the historical aspect. And I certainly have always been. So I guess that would be my momentary response.
The Karsavina book is Theater Street, right?
Theater Street, exactly.
Yeah, that made a huge impression. I read that very young. My mother, I remember giving it to me, and that was one of the ones for me too.
Isn't it a wonderful book? It's just so it's so evocative of a moment, and she's such an daring and sort of divine in that sense of a diva almost dancer. And, the images of her in Firebird are so extraordinary. I think they really changed the way we see the human body. And that's extraordinary. And that's really what Balanchine was after too, in that same sort of post-revolutionary tradition, like, how can we change this art form? This classical world has just died. Now what do we do? How can we change it? How can we move it forward? And I think certainly, your father was involved in that. And so was, Balanchine worked a lot on Broadway and in Hollywood too. He was like a theater man. He was interested in it all. And he took a lot from his Broadway years and from his film years, especially, like how to put the camera. He worked with Greg Toland, and, how to move the viewer's eye on the stage. So, I mean, the things you could read are vast. That's why these books take so long to write.
And
we're just
for taking the time to do them.
Could I just also throw in a plug for Agnes DeMille?
Oh, yes.
One of the great dance writers. I mean, everything from her own memoirs to Martha Graham. And then this was the book I was just thinking of, it's called Milestones in Dance in the USA. Really some terrific stuff in here, edited by Elizabeth McPherson.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more about Agnes DeMille. I mean, she's just a wonderful writer and has been an inspiration to me too, for sure.
Shortly after I moved to New York, the first Broadway show that I saw was the 1979 revival of Oklahoma, which she was still involved with. And shortly after it opened, I went to Lincoln Center, and I went into the library, and she was sitting alone at the library. And I went over to introduce myself to her. And she was so thrilled that I knew who she was, number one. I was like 19 years old. And we sat and had a wonderful conversation. She was just adorable. And I'm so glad that I had the courage to go over and say hello to her. So take those moments when they come along. Obviously, when you write something and you put it out into the world, you have no control over how other people will process it. But Jennifer, what is the biggest takeaway that you hope that people will have after they read your book?
Oh, what a hard question. I think
I know
the
you've
biggest
written other books, but I'm speaking
no,
specifically about
this
this
one
one.
for sure. This is the one that's certainly on my mind. I think maybe the biggest takeaway is that this is a vast and complicated life that really absorbed so many elements of the 20th century into his being. I mean, he was a quiet man. He was actually more of a watcher than I mean, he was a teacher, of course, and was very engaged in the world, but he was also a real watcher, and he was just taking in everything. And then everything was coming out, everything from the Russian post-revolutionary avant-garde to the Paris in the 20s surrealists and Dadaists and various different art movements from sort of Matisse to Picasso. And then he was taking in the Weimar Germany cabaret feel. And then he was, on Broadway and in Hollywood. He was just like absorbing all of these things. And then it was being transmuted inside him in whatever ways it does, and coming back out through his own musical process, because he was really a musician. So I'm saying too much probably, but it's a large and complex life, and he's not a perfect man. Who is, right? What great artist he had lots of difficulties. He was a sad man in a way, lonely, an exile. He could be cruel. He could be difficult. But he also he touched so many lives. So it's a big story, and a very human story, and a very 20th century story.
Well, thank you. Liza?
Yeah, I got so interested in what Jennifer was saying. To ask the question again, please?
What is your hope that people will take away after reading your book?
Well, there's so much mythology around musical theater dance. Agnes de Mille invented the Dream Ballet, which she did not. But she did many, many things that many other people did not do. She was the first to integrate dance into a musical. She was not the first, but there were many other things she did. She introduced the actor dancer to the musical. So I really wanted to demystify it, and I really wanted to locate what were the contributions and where did they come from, and to show some of the precedent. So I'm hoping that people will leave knowing more about the form and being more appreciative of people like Catherine Dunham, who were really erased, and all of those 1920s Black choreographers who were just, fired and their work was appropriated. I mean, they have been lost to history, and trying to really reclaim them. So I'm hoping people will leave the book with a greater appreciation for what the job is, and for the people who really were the contributors and what they did contribute.
Now, just for the fun of it, I've got two more questions that have nothing to do with our books. I've got two mystery questions. So, Liza, pick a number, 1 or 2.
1.
And your question is, interesting question. If you could meet any historical figure in dance, who would you choose and why?
Oh, wow. Oh, that's so hard.
I'm glad you chose that question.
Oh, God. The thing is, I met a lot of them. I didn't spend a lot of time with a lot of them, but I did meet a lot of them. I suppose, for all of the difficulties that he was, it would be interesting to sit down with Jerome Robbins.
Wow.
And have a real heart-to-heart.
Yes. Not that could ever happen if you did know him personally, based on the people that I know who knew him.
It's true. It's true.
And Jennifer, your question is, if you could pick up a skill instantly beyond anything that we've talked about today, what would it be?
I think I would, I think if I could, pick up a skill, as you say. I mean, it would take many years probably, but I would try to become a musician and try to understand, try to play, to really play, maybe the piano, maybe the cello, something like that, just to be able to. I mean, I've been in a way an instrument of music by dancing Balanchine's work, because the dancers really were like instruments in a way, and he created scores. So that leaves me with a sort of, I always regretted that I didn't have a deeper classical music training than I had. I had some, but I never played an instrument well. It was kind of, my sister got to do music lessons and I got to do the dance lessons. So,
Well, does your sister dance well?
and I don't know. Yeah, that's right. No, I don't think she does. She doesn't. So, so
Great.
that's what I would do.
Okay. And because it's National Mocktail Week, Liza, do you have a favorite mocktail?
Oh, gee. No, I don't really.
Do you have a favorite cocktail?
I like a glass of wine.
Oh, that's good.
Not really a cocktail.
That's okay. And Jennifer, you?
I'm afraid I'm kind of a fizzy water person.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm
That's
not
fine.
I don't
No.
drink much.
Well, I'm with you. But I do want to remind everyone again, the Richard Skipper Celebrates mug, and Liza and Jennifer, you're both going to get one. So send me your mailing addresses, and I will get them off. And I want to thank you all for being here. Don't go anywhere, Liza and Jennifer, for a moment. Each day I pull a word, and the word that I pull today is transparency. And as I was thinking about this word, and I read about transparency, it's very simple. Just be who you are, be your authentic selves, and tell the truth in everything you do. Every choice you make, everything that you say and do. Liza and Jennifer live that, obviously, in the work that they do. Just go out with everything you do. Every single day, we are doing two things. According to the Stoic philosophers, we are becoming and we are dying. That's not a morbid thing. It's going to happen to all of us. Live each day as if it's your last day, and go out and create amazing art. I always end every shows by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. These books are available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and other platforms. Go and check them out. Reach out to a friend that you haven't spoken to in a while, and reach out with a phone call. Not an email message, not a text message, not a private inbox message, but a phone call. And let them know what they mean in your life. And if you want to go a step further, send them as a gift one of these books, or send both of them. They're going to enjoy both reading about both of these incredible aspects of the theater, dance in musical theater, and of course, George Balanchine. But before I go, I always say, I used to say that we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. But someone sent me a meme and it said, we are all in the same storm, but we're in different size boats. Some are in yachts, some are in canoes, some are in rafts, some are in tugboats pushing everything upstream. I don't care what size boat you're in, just make sure you have a skipper by your side. And on that note, I'm going to leave the screen. I'm going to turn it over to you, Liza. You've got the final word, and then you'll turn it over to Jennifer. And Jennifer, both of you, don't worry about how to end the show. It could be about anything we talked about today, anything we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any final message you want to leave everyone with today. And Jennifer, when you say goodbye, the final credits will roll, so you don't have to worry about, how do I end this? So I will take care of all of that. Thank you both for being here. And anytime you have anything to promote or plug or talk about, I hope that you will keep Richard Skipper Celebrates in mind. And on that note, Liza, it's all yours. Thank you.
I guess I would just like to bring up the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion that the musical theater is really dealing with, much more so now than they ever have. Broadway is really embracing new ideas about who to cast and who to put into leadership positions on Broadway shows. And I think that that's just a very, very positive moment that we're in on Broadway and regional theater and just musical theater generally. And I think it's going to continue. And I think we have a long way to go, but I think we're making some good progress.
So I guess I'm not sure what to say, but I think the main thing that comes to my mind right now is the sort of constant Balanchine mantra of, what's the matter with now? You might be dead tomorrow, which was what he would say to his dancers. And, he would follow up with, do more, do more, do more. What are you saving it for? And so that is something that I often think of. And it's an interesting outcome of a life that was difficult and faced many perils. So have a good day, everybody. Thank you.